Hello, welcome back. I've been away for a little bit doing my PhD fieldwork, which I will do a video on at some point. People have asked me to, and I am happy to oblige, but I just have to make sure that I'm allowed to say certain things before I do that video. Thank you so much to everybody who has been subscribing recently. I got an amazing shout out from a couple of places from, what's it called? Is it City Steading, Mead, and more. So thank you to you guys for that shout out. They do some really interesting videos on mead making and like small property-based production of various treats. And of course Max from Tasting History gave me a wonderful shout out and put a link to my channel in his description. So Max, thank you so much. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi. Mor caredig. So, without further ado, I will do my latest little coffee shout out, and this one goes out to Charlotte. So thank you, Charlotte. It's very, very kind of you for that very generous donation. Thank you ever so much. It came in really, really handy whilst I was doing my fieldwork. I'll just pop that out there. So thank you very much, guys, for your generous coffee donations, monthly and individual as ever. Intersex people, hello. I have no idea if I have any intersex subscribers. It's none of my damn business. So there's this idea that certain things are modern inventions, being gay, being homosexual, being bisexual, being transsexual, being intersex, being non-binary. All of these things that affect millions and millions of people all around the world, billions of people around the world, in fact. There's an idea that these are all modern concepts. And I want to address just one of those today by talking about intersex people in history. I am going to use a couple of terms here which are historically used to describe intersex people. They're not terms that you should use today, and I'm just going to content warning that right here. So some of the earliest information we have on intersex people comes from Sumeria, where they had the word nibru, and the word nibru is generally accepted to mean eunuch. However, in this instance, this is somebody who was actually created by the gods with neither the man's or the woman's genitals. That is, to many people, a definition of somebody who is intersex, somebody who does not conform to the sexual binary. So the Sumerians are aware of this as a concept. Effectively, the Greek word hermaphrodite effectively means somebody who presents with both a man's and woman's sexual organs. So it's a concept that the Greeks are fully aware of. In fact, that word, hermaphrodite, is used right the way through the medieval and early modern periods and into the modern period to describe intersex people. So this isn't a new concept at all. It's just that the word intersex, to describe this situation, is relatively modern. It was invented in the 20th century. I'll talk about that in a minute. In the medieval world, there are obviously different views on this depending on who you talk to and where you go. In Judaism, and especially medieval Judaism, the gender of the person is assigned to them, generally speaking. So no matter what you're born with, no matter what you got, no matter what you're rocking, generally your gender, man or woman, male or female, will be assigned to you. So that's how that worked. In medieval Islam, it's different. So it's very interesting to read through some of these court cases where mostly it comes up surrounding inheritance. And generally, in Islamic law, if you can't determine what sex somebody is, in the medieval period, by the 13th century at least, if you can't determine whether somebody is one of the binary sexes, if somebody is a man or a woman, then they are given a third sex, which is Huntha Mushkil. So that is an in-between, an in-between categorization, effectively intersex. Huntha Mushkil. I've had to write it down. And it effectively means that I think you are male-female. I think that's the literal translation. I don't speak any Arabic. I have no knowledge of Arabic. I do apologise. But intersex people were recognised. And in fact, if you happened to own a slave, if you had an enslaved person who was intersex, under Islamic law, you would have to write down that, they will be freed. Not he will be freed or she will be freed. They will be freed. You have to use that Huntha Mushkil term. You have to use that. So that is actually an instance under Islamic early modern law, I think, at that point, where intersex people are recognised as needing this specific word used for them. Which is fascinating, because in medieval Europe, in Christian medieval Europe, in the 12th and 13th centuries, you have writers like Huguccio and Henri de Bracton, who write that basically if an intersex person, if a person effectively, if they say, so effectively they classify intersex people as either a male or a female, depending on the dominant sex organ, which is a spectrum, so it makes it difficult, and it's a very imperfect way of classifying people, and of course it imposes a gender on somebody, so that's not ideal either. But the way that they word it in a lot of the European law is if somebody has a beard and chooses to appear male, if somebody is masculine presenting and chooses at all times to be masculine presenting and wear men's clothing, then that is totally fine, and they get to act legally as a man. They can inherit as a man. They can represent themselves in court as a man. If they choose to shave their beard and wear women's clothing at all times and appear as a woman, then they can live as a woman. So the choice is given to somebody. In theory and technically, the choice is there, but you don't get the choice to be intersex. You get the choice as an intersex person to pick if you want to be a man or a woman. You can't be in the middle. You don't get to be Huntha Mushkil. Right? You don't get to choose and say, I am an intersex person. I don't identify as I'm not a man or a woman, I'm intersex. You don't get to do that. That choice is taken away from you. And people were punished for this. In the early modern period, we have an example from America, from the one of the English colonies. I can't remember which one now. Anyway, it's from the 17th century, and she was called Thomasine Hall. So we have an example from the 17th century in America of an intersex person who is known as Thomas or Thomasine Hall, and they were intersex. They were taken to court for effectively dressing in both men's and women's clothing at the same time. And they were punished by being forced to choose their gender role. Their punishment was, right, well, you've led people astray, now we're forcing you to dress, I think, as a man for the rest of your life. And I think they preferred to wear women's clothes, but with, like, a man's hat or something, or like a man's shirt, or breeches, and a woman's bodies for breast support. So, that's the kind of society that we're dealing with. And unfortunately, that's the kind of society we're dealing with now as well, to an extent. In the 19th century and in the 18th century, what they termed hermaphrodism or hermaphroditism was a bit of a curiosity. I'm really sad to say, but it's true. If you've ever heard of the bearded woman, that is just an intersex person. That's what that is. That's people literally paying money to see an intersex person exist. It's kind of demeaning and gross, but there you go. That's the world for you. Now, in the 19th century, there was actually, I think they were called Levi Steyram, editing Jimmy will put it on the screen, I'm sure, was another American intersex person whose right to vote was actually questioned. They questioned their right to vote in US elections because they were intersex. And it's such a weird case. It's such a strange case. This person, who was generally considered a man, property-holding man in America, I think this is the 1840s, somewhere around there, editing Jimmy can help, was basically taken to court and subjected to medical examinations, physical examinations, quite invasive physical examinations of their body, and was then, I believe, allowed to vote in the election. But afterwards, it was revealed that they menstruated. So again, they were taken back, and they were given more medical exams. And all of this was because people just couldn't get their heads around the idea that this person is Juntha Mushkil, neither a man nor a woman. When, like, my 80-odd-year-old relatives can have the idea of being intersex and or non-binary explained to them in seconds, the fact that this poor person, this poor had to be subjected to all of this is just insane. But that's the 19th century for you. And in fact, examinations were really common in the 18th and 19th century to figure out which sex was dominant. Like, is the male sex dominant or the female sex dominant? And they would literally, like, look at you. Doctors would just look at you and look at your genitals and be like, kinda looks like a guy. Gross. Like, come on. So you might know that there's an Intersex Solidarity Day every year on November the 8th, and that's because that is the birthday of one Herculine Bourbon, who was a French intersex person in the 19th century. Michel Foucault actually published their autobiography, and I believe that they identified as a woman. I'm not making any assumptions on any of this because it's not my place to. And if you want to read that, it is an astonishing account. It is an amazing account of being a 19th century intersex person in France. It is super, super interesting. I don't know if there's an English translation available, but it is very, very interesting. If you ever want to read that, I highly, highly recommend it. So in ancient Greece and Rome, there is actually a mythical figure called Hermaphroditos, and Hermaphroditos was the child of Hermes and Aphrodite, as you might expect. And that is where the word comes from. The word hermaphrodite comes from Hermaphroditos. And Hermaphroditos was in love with a water nymph, or the water nymph was in love with him, and after a prayer to the gods, their bodies were combined so that they could never be parted. So it's actually a really sweet little story about how this intersex person comes into being. And there are two kind of ways of thinking about intersex people in ancient Greece. One is Aristotle, who believes that intersex people are not in between male and female. They are a doubling up of the male and female sex organs. And Galen, who believes that there is this spectrum of sex, where your sex can either be like fully man, fully male, or your sex can be fully woman. And then there's this spectrum in between of all these different sexes, which is probably a lot closer to the modern view. In ancient Rome, it's a less sophisticated situation, as you might expect. The ancient Romans were not as sophisticated as people like to think, and a lot of people, certainly earlier in the Republic, thought that intersex people, when they were born, might be a bad omen. Pliny writes that in his day, that's fallen out of use. People don't really believe that superstitious nonsense anymore. So that is something that Romans are aware of, that Roman writers are aware of this, but they don't see this as much of as so much of a spectrum as they do as an unusual occurrence. So they are effectively othering intersex people as something weird, something unusual. In the modern world, things have changed fairly rapidly. So in 1917, a medical writer, I believe, called Goldschmidt, came up with the term intersex. By the 1940s, other medics and scientific researchers were trying to get the term used to replace the term hermaphrodite, and it now has. I remember as a child in Wales that the word hermaphrodite was, I'm afraid, still used to describe people who were born with sex organs that didn't match the sexual binary, and that isn't cool. But throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century, intersex people are, of course, still abused, misunderstood, forced to pick a gender, subjected to surgeries that they don't consent to. Sometimes as children, they are surgically treated and abused, let's not pretend, to try to assign them a sex that matches the binary of man or woman. And I think around 1% of people in the world are intersex. It's a lot of people. And it's really cold. I should have worn a coat to film outside. This was a mistake. It's depressing that thousands and thousands of years ago, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Sumerians recognized that sex was a spectrum. Especially the ancient Greeks recognized that sex, just like gender, and so many other things relating to human genetics and hormone levels, are a spectrum. And yet, thousands of years later, we're still struggling with that concept. It's so depressing to me, as someone who studies history over the long term. The idea that people are one thing or another, black and white, is never true. It never has been true. And I think it's about time we got back to realising that. So, thank you all for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi am wylio. Mi fyddai yn ôl wythnos nesa. We're back on the schedule, so I will be back next week. And, yeah, like and subscribe and do all those YouTuber-y type things. People are going to walk past in the background now, and I'm not going to stop talking, because I'm on a roll. So, diolch yn fawr iawn am ymuno ar channel. Thank you very much indeed for joining the channel. Hi to all the new peeps. I will see you next week. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now. Hi, Serious Jimmy, back again. If any of the things that I mentioned at the end of this video have affected any of the people watching, I've put some resources that have been recommended me down in the description of this video. If you are feeling really down about any of the stuff that I just talked about, go talk to some of these professional people. There are tons and tons of people out there who've been in your situation, guaranteed, over thousands of years. And we are not in ancient Greece, and not everybody understands that you don't necessarily lie on the sex or gender spectrum in the way that your parents or your family or your colleagues or your friends think you should. But I do, and a lot of the really cool people out there do as well. You have a right to know that you are loved, you are valid, and you have as much right to be here on this earth as any other creature. Okay? So take care of yourself, please be safe, love yourself, and you are doing great. Alright? You got this. We got you. The cool people got you. The cool types got you. We got you. The archaeologists have got you. We got your back. The archaeologists got everyone's back. We understand. We understand that you can't gender a skeleton. It's a skeleton. Yeah, you can sex a skeleton. You'll get it wrong. You'll get it wrong. I got it wrong. I got it wrong all the time. That's why I don't do osteoarchaeology. I'm gonna crop at bones. What's a fibia? I don't know. What's a tibia? I don't care. Is that a skull? Is it a skull? Is it a bowl? What is that? That could be anything. I don't know. I don't know. What is bone? This is way more comfy. Can I rig it to work here? I can! Oh, amazing. Amazing. This is what we want. Alright. I'm slightly sideways. Is that okay? Does that work? Can I be slightly sideways? I think I can be slightly sideways. Oh, there we go. Got the horizon line. Yes, come here. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come on, horizon line. Work for me. Work for me. Work for the camera. Oh, you love it. You love the camera. The camera loves you. Awesome. Great stuff.